I appreciate first of all you coming, because the days actually turned out to be fairly nice, and it's actually a little bit warm outside. I was outside just a little bit ago making the trek back over from teacher education, and it's the afternoon, and it's after spring break, and all those variables should be adding up to you doing something else. So I'm really glad that you're here, because grammar is not the sexiest topic ever, but it is probably one of the most important. Because I think that if you can identify things in your world that you need to work on, things that will make you better, then that's a huge step. And grammar is one of those things that is a problem for all of us from time to time. And I want to offer a caveat to you. First of all, I have to go online to my trusted sources, which I'm going to share with you today, and I have to look things up all the time. Rules and pronunciations and punctuations and all different kinds of things, because if you don't use these kinds of things every day, you lose them. And if you never do them in the first place, then sometimes you have to seek out. And so don't ever be afraid to do that. And you will probably ask me a question today or two that I do not know the answer to, and I am not afraid to tell you that I don't know the answer. What I will say is we can research it together, or I can give you places to look, or whatever. We'll get it figured out, but I may not know everything, okay? Let me tell you how I got here. I actually, in a former life, was an English teacher, okay, for high school kids. And so that's where my training is out of teacher education. And I'm kind of a geek about this stuff. I really am very passionate about the whole idea of your written presentation, and your spoken presentation says a whole lot about you. It says just as much about you as your work experience or the clothes that you're wearing or whatever the case may be. And people make some pretty interesting assumptions about you based on the way that you present yourself verbally and in writing. Dory, do you want to start off with the piece that you had? Dory brought in a written piece that she received from, well, I'll let you tell. You told me, but I probably better.
Well, we recently, you guys know, Tiara left us, and so we have been in the process of hiring a new person for her position. And we got lots of applications. I think we got between 35 and 40 applications for her position. And a woman that I went to graduate school with sent me an email to apply, or to inquire about the job, and then also sent me her resume. And I was shocked, honestly, when I read it. So this is, and I brought it for you guys to see, and I blacked out her name, so I'm not throwing her under the bus, but I wanted to show you guys what I got from her, and just see what I got. Like I said, I got two things from her. First of all, she sent me an email inquiring about the job, and to start out with, she spelled my name wrong. I was in school with her for 4 years, and my name is on our website, so she spelled my name wrong, which I know I can get over that, but then you can very clearly see, well, you can just see all the little red lines. And I read that and I thought, that's interesting that she would send that email when she's inquiring about possibly, having a job with our office. Lots of little mistakes, the I not capitalized, and I guess I'm kind of like Susan, that kind of stuff drives me crazy. I mean, I capitalize when I text people, so maybe I'm a little bit on the extreme, but that's what I got from her. And then a few days later, she sent me her resume, and so I have that for you too, because it's quite interesting as well. Now, she sent this to me in Microsoft Word, so I'm assuming that she put this together in Microsoft Word and would have been able to see all the little red lines everywhere. But, she misspelled counseling and grief and critical, and she misspelled the hospital that she works at or worked at. So, can you guys guess what I did? I did not call her.
Laugh.
Yeah, because that's how she presented herself as a candidate for our job. Because I see that and I think, if that's what somebody's going to give me as their resume, my first impression of them, what are they going to give me? If I ask them to do something for me, what am I going to get? And I wouldn't expect wonderful things. So I thought that might be a relevant thing for you guys to see. So grammar counts. Because, if you look at her experience might have been relevant to what we do here, but it really didn't look much past all the spelling and grammar. A lot wrong.
If she were to contact you and inquire about the job still, would you tell her what she did wrong, or if she asked, would you tell her?
I would. I mean, I would personally, because really, her experience, she has experience in counseling and some of the things we look for when we look to hire. But, you know, I think it would be kind of a hard thing to tell her, because I don't like to hurt people's feelings, but, you know, if this is what she's putting out there every time she's applying for a job, she's going to have a really hard time. So, I mean, I would feel kind of bad about saying it, but I think, you know, I would tell her that.
Do you think this kind of thing is starting to happen because, you know, in our society, the texting is, we kind of start writing like we text? And
I mean, I think that's part of it. We see a lot of that. I don't know, Susan, if you have particular thoughts on the texting thing is.
or just,
I
you
think
know,
it's part of it.
messaging and.
Yeah. Yeah,
It
we're
started
kind of
before
very
that.
informal.
I think it's just laziness.
I find it curious that she actually graduated Master of Science with, how did she get past the educational requirements to graduate with that master's?
You know, and I think that says a lot too, because this woman has a master's degree. I mean, I was in school with her, so I know, you know, we worked in groups together. I know she's an intelligent woman. I know she knows how to write. She just chose not to, which I think says something as well, that maybe it is just.
I think it's a good habit to get into when you're texting someone, to write with complete sentences, complete thoughts, and make sure you're spelling things correctly. Because it drives me absolutely nuts when somebody talks to me. I don't like that.
Yeah, especially not in an, you know, an email inquiry, but you know, that's not what you want. So, anyway, I just wanted to show you guys that.
We're gonna call this exhibit worst case scenario.
Okay.
Because I've received, over the years, I've received interesting things too, but I don't think I've ever received anything quite that bad. That almost makes me wonder if you went in and doctored that a little bit.
I did not. I promise.
The big takeaway from that particular example is that there are times in life when you have to be perfect. There are absolutely positively times in life when you have to be perfect, and that's one of them. Your resume and cover letters need to be completely 125,000% error-free. They have to be, because whenever you are presenting that face to an employer, that is what you look like at your very best. You don't want people walking away from your resume going, I wonder what she looks like on a random Tuesday. Okay, if this is what it looks like at its very best. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about grammar. So who in here wants to own that you may have some grammar issues? And that maybe sometimes you say things, or you think about saying things, or you write things, and you're not sure if it's correct. Okay? Reality is that most of us probably have those things in our world. And what I want to do today is go through, and I want to identify some of the common mistakes that people make, and then also give you some this PowerPoint that you take with you, I think will be really helpful because it has a lot of this information sort of into one document, and you can keep it and refer back to it, and it will hopefully help you think through when you face those questions in your writing or in your speaking. Now, am I supposed to, is that an apostrophe S or not, or whatever the case may be, then you can help, it will help you make those decisions. So let's talk about why it's important. Now, obviously, we've already set that stage, but when you speak and write, you send the message about your intelligence. Okay? And the gentleman in the back, what is your name?
Matt.
Matt?
Matt.
Because Matt, whenever he read that resume, and whenever he read the cover letter, where did he go immediately in his mind? How did that girl get to graduate school? Okay? Which is probably where many of us would go, at first blush. Okay? So people will question your intelligence based on how you present yourself, whether it's appropriate or not. Using appropriate grammar communicates respect, especially across generations. Okay? Now, if you talk to your garden variety 15-year-old, he or she probably has a different opinion about text language than somebody who is not a garden variety 15-year-old. I'm much like you in that when you send me a text that says you for you, I want to come through the phone. Like, use your fingers and type that out, okay? So, respect across generations. And what's really interesting is that for those of you who are of the younger ilk, is that you will likely, when you go out into seeking your first job, you're going to run into people like Dory, or people like me, who are sensitive to those kinds of things. Okay, I call myself a Nazi, but that's just appropriate. Okay, but we're sensitive to those things. And if if I see one issue like that on a resume, I'm just not that interested. Okay, because that is your chance to be perfect, and that is my expectation. You wouldn't go to a job interview wearing sweats and a t-shirt, I hope. Okay, I'm making some assumptions, but I'm going to assume that you wouldn't do that. And you would be, chewing on your chewing gum, and your grammar needs to be as polished as your appearance. Okay, so that needs to be in line with everything else that you do in the future. And I've seen that before. I've seen lots of some people who looked really good on the surface. Either their resume was great, and their cover letter was great, and their outfit was tremendous, and their makeup wasn't too much, and everything was all put together, and then we string some grammar problems together, and then I cry, because I can't hire you. Okay, so that's something that happens quite a bit as well. One of my dear friends posted this on my Facebook wall just recently. You remember that? Yeah. I have a bit of a reputation. But it's not a bad risk. It could be worse. But yeah. So yes. Do I make judgments when it comes to people for jobs and things of that nature based on that sort of thing? I absolutely do. Do other people make judgments about you in casual conversation, in dating relationships, in friendships, whatever the case may be? Do they make judgments about you because of your grammar and things like that? Yeah, definitely, they definitely do. Some are probably more stringent about it than others, but it is an area of judgment. Okay. All right, so we're going to talk about commonly misused words today. The kinds of things that when you're writing them down, you're like, okay, I know this could be something different, but I'm not going to look it up, and I'm just going to go with it. Okay, so we're going to talk those through. We're going to talk about the correct use of contractions, and I'm not talking about the kinds of things you have when you have a baby. That's a contraction, but it's a different kind of contraction. We're going to talk about when you put words together, take out letters, and add a little apostrophe T. We're going to talk about correct use of possessives. Nothing makes me crawl a tree faster than incorrect use of a possessive, and so we're going to talk through that. We're going to talk about parallel structure, which this starts to sail off into some real serious English teacher areas, so I'm going to make that as exciting as possible. But there are some areas of parallel structure that we need to talk about. And then we're going to talk about words that aren't words. Words that you hear people say all the time that aren't words. The one that comes to mind that I did put in the presentation because it's so obvious is ain't. Okay? We don't even need to talk about that, right? Okay, you know that that's not a word, and that's pretty common. But there are some other words that are out there that I hear people say all the time that are really not words. And so we're going to identify some of those and see if you use it.
Is it appropriate to intentionally use a word that is not a word because of, okay, I'm thinking specifically of their selves, instead of themselves, their selves, implying the singular plural instead of the plural singular of the other.
I'm with you.
It's not actually a word. If you try to look it up, it doesn't exist. But by intent.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. That's your clue. If you look it up and it's not a word, don't use it.
No.
Right. Yeah. But I see where you're going.
But I use it anyway.
Yeah. Well, I won't judge you in here, but if I'm ever interviewing you for a job, I'll use it. Fair enough.
I don't use it very often in speak. I mean, it's in writing.
Right.
Yep.
And do they call you on it, your instructors?
I actually usually emphasize the reason I put it. in
But
there
they still call you on it though, right?
I have not.
Depends on how much energy
not
they
really.
have.
Not really. That's why I'm bringing it up now. Is it appropriate to? I mean, how do words get coined in the first place? How do they become?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, the scope of the presentation will not go there today because goodness knows that's a good question, an important question, because there are lots of words that are in the dictionary now that weren't there 20 years ago, and they just become part of the colloquial, and therefore they get added. But I think a good rule of thumb is the one that you suggested. If you look up in the dictionary, it's not there. That's probably fair warning, not to include it. Someone has to be the authority somewhere, right? Okay. Let's start off with lay versus lie. It's one of my favorites. I had this conversation with my husband last night. This is how the conversation in my house goes because he always makes this error. Okay. And I say chickens lay, people lie. And he goes, yeah, and your mechanical skills suck. Which is right. That's a give and take in our relationship. But chickens lay, people lie. If you're referring to something, and you're referring to putting something somewhere, you use lay. Okay? If you're referring to being in a reclining position, you use lie. Okay? You lay the pencil down and you lie on the floor. You don't lay on the floor because you're not putting on the floor. You are reclining on the floor. Okay? So you keep the vision of the chicken in your mind, and keep these two sentences in your mind, and those two sentences hopefully will help you make the decision as to what word you should be using. Okay, lay versus lie. There's the first one. Moot versus mute. Okay, I see this quite a bit. Moot refers to something that is no longer relevant. Okay, Mute refers to somebody who does not speak. Okay? I hear people use these words interchangeably all the time, but they have completely different meanings, okay? And here are the example sentences. My ball glove is torn, but it's moot because the game is over. It doesn't matter, it's irrelevant, okay? Because she's timid, she tends to be mute during class. She doesn't speak, okay? So again, commonly confused, but that is the difference. So hold on to that. That way if you're thinking sometime you're writing a paper and you're not sure, you can pick. We're gonna be here a while. Siobhan just died a little bit inside.
Don't go to Walmart with the woman.
I've taken Siobhan through, now it's become sport. But when Siobhan and I used to spend a considerable amount of time, when I used to work in Project Stay, I should probably give you that piece of information if you're wondering why I have such a relationship with Siobhan. But Siobhan and I used to work together in Project Stay. And we would go to Sam's often to purchase things. And if you go to any retail establishment that has a 10 items or less lane, then you know where I'm going with this, okay? Years and years ago, when Target was first put in Joplin, which golly, how long has that been now? Those of you who've been around for a while? Ages ago, right? I mean, I can remember life before Target, but barely. So there was a time when Target was first placed where they had their 10 items lane, but the sign said 10 items or fewer. And I remember at the time thinking, this is the best thing ever, because that's grammatically correct. Okay? 10 items or less is not. And if you go back to Target tonight, which I'm going to, it's a homework project, if you go back to Target tonight, you will see that they have changed their signs in the last few years to 10 items or less, which is not correct. Now, I make it a point, whenever I go through the line at Target, the 10 items or less line, if nobody's in line behind me, and if my husband isn't with me because he's done with that, he's let me know that we don't want to do this anymore. But I will point it out to the poor hapless cashier that your sign is wrong. And then I will proceed to explain why. Now again, that's only because no one's behind. It's only if no one is behind me, and if I'm, and she looks like she's not gonna, hurt me or whatever, then I will explain. And then I explain why. Okay. And the way Siobhan comes into this is whenever we go to Sam's together, I explain to the cashier why.
It's embarrassing.
And it's embarrassing for her, but
What about like food for less? I have to bring it up.
No, I'm glad you did. And what's really ironic about that is my sister's manager there, and so we had these conversations. And I thought about going into Target or whatever to take a picture of that, but I have another visual to show you. But let's talk a little bit about the difference between the two. And you're going to sound really smart when you do this, okay? So less is reserved for hypothetical quantities, okay? And fewer is reserved for quantities that you can count. So if it's something that you can actually count the number, like 10 items or, then it's fewer. But if it's a hypothetical quantity, then it was something where you would use less, okay? So here's an example with both words in the sentence. Because I have a new job, I have less time to do things I enjoy, okay? I have several fewer hours in the week for my hobbies, okay? Hours, the number of hours, something that are very easily quantifiable, so you say fewer. But time is a little bit more esoteric, okay, and out there. Make sense? Okay, so the next time, here's your homework assignment, next time you're at Target, and poor Gail, this is the second time you've heard this story, but because I always tell it, 422, but next time you're in Target or Walmart, tell the little cashier that maybe you get them a couple points on the ACT.
You're gonna start a local movement here.
You want to do it? Right after we're going to Target, we're going to do a flash mob. For real, we are going to do it. I mean, how busy can they be at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Tuesday, right? This is my favorite. One of my students gave me this. Yeah. So, but anytime you go, anywhere you go, you'll see. And I was really heartbroken when Target changed their signs because I thought, oh my gosh, I really love shopping here, and now not so much. Okay, affect versus effect. This is a common one. Okay, this is one that we see all the time. The best way to remember that is that affect is a verb and effect is a noun. Okay, so if something is affecting you, then it's A. If something is causing an effect, then it's an E. Okay, the amount of time I spend on Facebook really affects my grade. Verb. Okay. A major effect of spending too much time on Facebook is that my grades suffer. Same kinds of concepts in both of those sentences, but just read a little differently. Okay, and the word takes on a different position in the sentence. Okay, so another really easy way to remember what word goes there. Loose versus lose. I see this, do you guys see this one? Okay, I see this one all the time where people confuse these two. Okay, loose is the opposite of tight, and lose is the opposite of fine, gain, or win. Okay, I need to lose 10 pounds, my pants will be loose.
That's one of the worst ones.
Yes, it is. It's everywhere. And I agree. How many of you have been guilty of this?
I've seen the effect one more than I've seen this though.
Yeah. Yeah, these are all, and whenever you see these, a lot of you probably will be nodding because you're like, oh yeah, I've seen those. And if if you've been guilty of them, you can just, self-forgive quietly. But, yeah. Who versus whom? This is a tricky one. This is a tricky one for me sometimes. I have to stop and really think it through, okay? You're going to use who when he or she or it would make sense. So if you're dealing with a sentence and you could use he, she, or it in the subject, okay, then you would use who. And you would use whom, where him or her would make sense. So, who loves you? He loves you. He loves you? Who loves you? Okay? Use whom, where him or her. I saw Sally, I met her at the party. I saw Sally, whom I met at the party. Make sense? Okay? So, again, a couple of really easy sentences. Keep this close by, and it'll help you make those decisions. Farther versus further. I think about this one too. I think I mess it. I honestly, if I were to own it, I think I mess this one up all the time, to be really honest. Okay? Farther, it's much like less and fewer. Farther implies a measurable distance, whereas further implies a hypothetical distance, or one that you can't easily measure. John threw the ball farther than Steve did. Okay? The bad weather causes further implications for our vacation plans. It would be easy for you to be able to go and measure how much farther the ball went when John threw it as opposed to when Steve threw it. Okay? But to talk about implications on your vacation plans, those are difficult to measure. Okay, so you would use further. Okay. So far, so good? Okay. Okay. Ban myself. And you know what I'm talking about. You guys have seen these as well. And these are the kinds of things I see on Facebook all the time that make me want to scream, right? Especially this one. This one up top, okay? The your versus your. So I want to talk through a little bit about the common confusions with contractions, pronouns, and
At least
possessives.
you didn't have you are.
Do what?
At least you didn't have your, like you are up there.
Yeah, yeah, but let me tell you, here in a second I'll show you some other things that I see, and it'll be, this makes me want to scream, but there's another layer that we'll talk about here in just a second. So the your versus the your, there, and there, and it's versus its. This is the point in the presentation where if you are not an English language, learning English as a second language, you should just be thankful. Because as difficult as this is for people who are native speakers of English, imagine if you're trying to learn English as a second or third or fifth language. Holy bananas. Anybody learning English as a second language or did learn English as a second language? Hey, it's hard. It's rough stuff. It's rough for native speakers, let alone people trying to learn it later in life. So, okay, your versus your. Your, Y-O-U-R, implies possession. Y-O-U apostrophe R-E is a contraction for you are. And like I mentioned before, contraction is essentially a wonderful thing that we do in the English language where you can get, it's a kind of a lazy thing really, where you can get rid of letters and add an apostrophe to convey the same thing, okay? If you make your plural, Y-O-U-R plural, don't use an apostrophe. This word right here is never correct, and I see this all the time. Y-O-U-R apostrophe S. Ah, okay? That's never, ever, 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 ever correct, okay? You are the best thing that ever happened to me, your. If what you're trying to say is you are, then it's the contraction, okay? Where is your house? Your possession, where is your house, is the car in front, yours. Again, possession. And the plural form. Okay, no apostrophe. Okay? So, the rule of thumb, and you probably already know this, is that if what you're trying to say is you are, it's the contraction.
In formal writing though, I know we've been taught over and over and over not to use contractions at all.
Yeah. And some instructors will say that. And I think if you're writing something pretty formal, I would steer clear of them. And one of the reasons I would steer clear of them is because some people find them to be a little lazy. And I would also steer clear of them because if you type out the you are, you really reduce your risk of making a mistake. Okay? Because if you are thinking in your mind you are, then you're not gonna write this, you're not gonna write that, and you're probably going to be correct. Okay, so yeah, that's a really good point, that some people think that informal writing contractions are pretty easy. Okay? And that'd be one of those things, you know, when you're getting formal writing edited or graded by a teacher, if a teacher's kicking something back to you and making comments about that, take that as a hint that you probably need to not use those. Okay, I'm running the risk of offending you terribly.
I've seen this one.
I want you to know that I sent this to Dory in advance and said so. Am I gonna get in trouble if I use this? Because I had other examples, but to me, you won't forget this, okay? And I'm all about making an impression. So the difference between knowing your shit or knowing that you are shit. That was for you, Siobhan.
I know.
Okay. Okay. There, and there. Okay. And this one is a little more complicated only because there's an additional layer to it. Okay. There implies possession, much like your. Okay. There, T-H-E-R-E, implies location. And there, they are, is a contraction for they are. Okay. And this is a sentence that sort of describes all that. They are with their possession, friends, over their location. Okay? I'm trying to think of another sentence. I'll come back to that. But does that make sense? Contraction, possession, location. Okay? And if you want, just steal this little mem, stick it on your desktop or something, and go back and find that. And then its versus its. Its, I-T-S, implies possession, and its apostrophe S is a contraction for it is. So you sort of see you can see the pattern here. You've got your contractions that are putting your two words together. It's raining outside, it is raining outside, and my hair is losing its curl. Okay? It is raining outside, and my hair is losing its possession curl. Okay. So far, so good? Okay, good. All right, so let's talk a little bit about parallel structure. And this is where things get a little bit deeper and where things, these are mistakes that get a little bit easier to make in speech. But I guess the good news is that you can make some of these mistakes in speech and maybe, you know, a good half of the population won't even notice, okay? Because these are a little bit more subtle. But we're gonna talk a little bit about subject-verb agreement, and some of you just flashed back to 7th grade because that's probably the last time you actually really talked about subject-verb agreement. We're gonna talk about paired conjunctions. Okay? And we're also going to talk about correctly pairing pronouns, like do you say he and I or me and him or that sort of thing. Okay? There is a method to that particular madness. Okay? Okay, subject-verb agreement. And this is much like what Matt was saying earlier. Matt, right? Matt, okay. Subject-verb agreement. Single subjects should be paired with single verbs, and plural subjects should be paired with plural verbs. Okay? So, for example, he runs, they run. Okay, and she is and they are, which you knew that already. Okay, the only real trick about that is if you're learning English as a second language, you're asking yourself why is the singular verb plural. But we don't have to talk about that because you know this because because it sounds right, and you've been studying that for your entire life. So that's basic subject-verb agreement. That if you have a single subject, then you have a single verb. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about what happens whenever you add the wild, wacky world of the prepositional phrase. Because this is where things get interesting, okay? And I have to still have to stop and think this through in my speech. And I catch myself making these mistakes all the time and going back and changing them, okay? So if you have words that are inside a prepositional phrase, they don't impact the choice of verb. Even though when you add a prepositional phrase, sometimes you're adding more to the sentence that leads you to believe that that would change the verb. Okay, here's an example. She, along with the rest of the team, runs 3 miles each day. Okay? Now the she, along with the rest of the team, indicates plural, right? Because it's her and a whole bunch of crazy runners, okay, who are running. And that would lead you, oh, okay, well that should be singular, that should be run. She, along with the rest of the team, run 3 miles a day. No, because along with the rest of the team is a prepositional phrase. Okay? And so anything that's inside a prepositional phrase does not impact the verb choice. All right? Now, how do you know when it's a prepositional phrase? I'm so glad you asked. That's in the next sentence. You can generally identify a preposition by placing it in this sentence. The squirrel runs blank the tree. Up, down, around, along, inside, over, okay? If the word fits nicely into this sentence, it is probably a preposition, and if it's attached to additional verbiage in the sentence, it's probably a prepositional phrase. And if all those things are true, it's not going to impact the verb. Make sense? Okay? Again, if you make that mistake in speech, it's one of those things that the majority of people probably did not catch. In writing, it's going to be a little easier for people to catch it, just because people have more opportunity to be able to, study and read your words. Okay? So a very small thing, but an important thing. So make sure that you are careful and mindful of those nasty prepositional phrases, because while they add a lot of wonderful information, sometimes they confuse your verb choice. Okay, correctly pairing pronouns. Is it you and me, or me and you? Is it him and me, or me and him? Is it he and I, or he and me, or him and I, or him and me? Thoughts?
To me, it's always a matter for the I-V thing, it's how would you break it down without the other partner, that's where I start from.
That's part of it, for sure.
Depends on if it's subject or object also.
My dad, and I will always remember this, but my dad would always say, like, if I start a sentence saying something along the lines of me and him, he'd say, oh, is he mean? Okay, Dad, I get it. Right? So, me and blank is never correct. Okay? And this is more, really more an issue, this part is more an issue of etiquette. If you're referring to yourself and somebody else in a sentence, it's generally considered polite to put yourself last. So you put the other person first and then yourself last. And so when you find yourself saying something like, mean, is that person mean? Ask yourself, is that person mean? Or next time you catch your kid doing that, me and him, oh, is he mean? And your kid will look at you like you have 6 heads, and then you have to explain yourself, but maybe your kid will make that mistake again, okay? So me and blank is never correct, okay? And then this goes along with what Matt was saying. To determine what's correct in other examples, take the sentence down to its bones. Okay? So you and me are going to the movies later. You and I are going to the movies later. So if we were going to take this down to its bones and essentially start first with talking about just us, okay? And we were to change this verb to am, would it be appropriate to say, me am going to the movies, or I am going to the movies? I am going to the movies, okay? So when you start taking sentences down to the bones, that will tell you what to choose. So you and I are going to the movies later. And you may have to doodle the verb a little bit just because you may be going from plural singular or whatever the case may be, but that, just start working with it. Doodle with it, get it down to the bones, put some words in there and see what makes sense, okay? Mom is taking Kelsey and I to the mall. Mom is taking Kelsey and me to the mall. So if we were going to take that sentence down to its bones, and we were just going to talk about us, and we were just going to, toss Kelsey into the bus, what would be correct? Mom is taking Kelsey, or Mom is taking me to the mall, right? You wouldn't say Mom is taking I to the mall. You would say Mom is taking me to the mall. So it's Mom is taking Kelsey and me to the mall. Make sense? Okay? So that is, and again, that is one of those things that requires a little bit of practice. And in speech, I'm confident, I don't know that I really think about it that much, and I probably should pay more attention to it, but I'm confident that I make that mistake all the time, because that's a complicated thing to think about on the fly, okay? But in writing, you have a little bit more time, a little bit more opportunity for thought, so you may be able to think that through. But take it down to its bones, take it down to its subject verb and then make that choice based on that. You remember conjunction junction? Anybody want to sing it?
Conjunction, function.
I think you can actually still see that sometimes on Saturday mornings. I know I could at least a couple of years ago. I don't know if they still play it. If they don't, they should. And if you've never heard of conjunction junction, please go get on YouTube. Who's never heard of conjunction junction? I said it will get inside your brain and it will just eat a hole and it will just be singing it all the time. And who hasn't heard of it? Did you say you hadn't heard of it?
I said watch YouTube.
Oh, okay. So my sister, actually, I stole this off. I got this off my wall. My sister put that up on my wall not too long ago because we have really fond memories of Schoolhouse Rock. And Schoolhouse Rock does actually, if you wanted just some really fun things about different kinds of grammar and punctuation and parts of speech and things like that, just go on YouTube and look for what's called Schoolhouse Rock. And it will pull up a lot of these really funky little cartoons that were phenomenally popular in the 70s and I think still have some level of popularity now, but they have wonderful little sing-song. It's how I learned the preamble. I could still sing the preamble to you, I won't, but I'm just for your protection, but I could sing the preamble to you because of Schoolhouse Rock and have a fairly decent idea about other things just because of that. But having said all that, Google conjunction junction and see if you don't fall in love. But paired conjunctions are, again, subtle things that happen in the English language, but important things that happen in the English language. And they go along with parallel structure because oftentimes what happens is we'll get the first part of the conjunction, but we don't get the second part of the paired conjunction. And here are some examples. Okay? Generally, when we're talking about paired conjunctions, we're talking about either or, neither nor, or both and, okay? Which are nicely represented in conjunction junction, which you will see when you Google it. Okay? So the first sentence, either the dog or the cat will be bathed tonight, which essentially means that you're either going to bathe the dog or the cat, right? You get to choose, or someone's going to get chosen, okay? Either the dog or the cat.